Hey guys, Brooke and Laura here with Legal Talk Tuesday on this beautiful spring Tuesday. And today we are talking about divorce. Specifically, we know how difficult and emotional divorce can be, and we want to give you 3 things that you need to discuss with your spouse before you start the process. So that way you can save some time, money, and some of the additional stress that goes along with divorce. So the first thing that you need to talk about is real property. By real property, I mean your marital home that you own or any land that you may own. And you need to kind of discuss what is going to happen to that property. So the property can be divided a few different ways. You can either have one of you take the property, or the property can be sold. And you're going to want to consider different things when you decide which approach to take. So you're going to want to consider your needs. If you have kids, sometimes location is really important for schools and things like that. Depending on jobs, where you're going to live, post-divorce is really important. And also the spouse's ability to pay, because you don't want to leave your house with a spouse that doesn't have the means to pay for the home. And then, especially if you're still on the home, on the mortgage, and then them not have the ability to refinance or the ability to actually make the mortgage payments, because even though you're divorced and even though they're awarded the home, you still are going to be on the hook from the bank for paying that mortgage. So you want to be considerate of those things. You need to discuss who's going to be responsible for payments and maintenance of the home. So, obviously the mortgage payments are one thing to consider, but you're also going to want to consider any utilities, any other things. Usually the person that is awarded the home is the person that's going to pay those things, but sometimes there's unique circumstances, and you may fall in that category where certain things are paid for. Like, for instance, some people pay a mortgage to their spouse in lieu of child support. So there are some things, you have some room to be a little bit creative. And also that'll protect you if you have any concerns about your spouse's ability to pay if they have the home. Who holds the mortgage of the home is also really important. If it's in both of your names, the best thing to do is for the spouse that's awarded the home, if they stay in the home, to refinance the home. Sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes you might want to give a grace period for them to maybe get back on their feet, or get to a certain point in their career where they can actually do that. But you want to put some kind of definitive timeline on that. Otherwise, again, you're on the hook for that, and that's going to be some kind of debt on your credit. So you're going to have to account for that if you go to try to get any other kind of loan or mortgage or anything like that. If you decide you're going to sell the house, or if the court orders you to sell the house, then you also need to discuss how that property is going, or how the proceeds of that property are going to be divided. And you need to think about real property before the marriage. So any property that's accumulated, whether that's your house that you live in, or you have land that you purchase, any of that that's accumulated that you own during the marriage is considered joint marital property. But if you have something that has come into the marriage, if your spouse, had some land that was gifted by a will, that can be considered separate property. Or if they came to the marriage and they already had that land, then that would be your spouse's property. So that's some things that you want to consider. And the same is going to be true for your personal property. And I'll let Laura kind of tell you a little bit more about what that looks like.
So the second thing that you need to really talk about with your spouse before it's important to talk about these things before you decide to file for divorce, because it just lengthens the process and can make it more expensive if you have full representation attorneys, if you don't already kind of have some kind of agreement. So the second thing that you need to talk about is personal property. And personal property, that can be a little confusing for people sometimes. Real property, like Brooke said, is homes or land, but personal property is pretty much everything else. It's property that can be moved. So it's your cars, it's money, cash, stocks, bonds, things like that, furniture, clothing, your bank accounts, your jewelry, that type of thing. That's all personal property, things that can be moved and tangibly handled in a different kind of way than your house and any land that you own. So one thing that people don't really think about is that all personal property and that is marital has to be accounted for in a divorce, regardless of who has it in their name. And that's true specifically with automobiles and like bank accounts and things like that. Just because the bank account is in your name doesn't mean that it's not marital property. So people sometimes think about, oh, well, it's mine. Mine's the only name on it. Well, it's not really yours. If it's marital property because if you've been putting money in and out of it, the only thing that really you can get away with that are things like what Brooke said, where if you acquired something or, if you got something or something was gifted to you before your marriage, or it's, a family member left you something in their will, then that can be a gray area. Most of the time that's going to be just yours and not marital property. But think about the fact that everything has to be accounted for. If you get all the furniture and she gets all the jewelry, then that's totally fine. But it needs to kind of be laid out in writing so that there's no confusion at a certain point when you guys are actually doing the final separation. Another thing inside personal property that you have to think about is debts. Debt is considered personal property that you need to worry about and talk about when you're getting divorced. So you want to make sure that you have all debt that's listed in both of your names kind of written down. And a court, especially in different counties, and especially when kids are involved, they give you this document called an affidavit of financial means. And that is a place where you list all of your debt. And that's going to be credit cards, loans, things like that. But the person who is taking on that debt needs to be very aware that they're taking on that debt. So let's say that you have $5,000 on a Visa card in both of your names. If let's say that the husband is awarded the card and the debt, then he's responsible solely for that debt, paying that off. There are occasions, depending on financial situations of each person, that one person would take on the debt of a credit card, but the other person would still get access to use the card for new purchases. So keep that in mind. A lot of this is fluid, and especially if you're in agreement on things, a court is rarely going to say that you can't agree on stuff. So the better situation is if you guys can sit down and have these conversations. An attorney is necessary, I think, to help you with the framework of what you need to talk about. But things like the debt and any assets and things like that, you guys can really figure that out for yourself if you're able to have that conversation. So along with the debt, things like assets, I'm using air quotes for some reason, I have no idea why. But all assets are going to be things kind of like I mentioned at the first when I was explaining what personal property, examples of personal property. Assets are going to be your cars and, any kind of bank accounts and things and, financial portfolios, retirement accounts, things like that. And you want to make sure that you have that laid out for whoever, if you have, a car loan in both of your names, but it's the car that the wife drives, then you need to figure out what you're going to do with that. So she might need to refinance the loan or assume it in her name only. Or if you were agreeing to, still help with the loan, you have to kind of lay all that out. And it's always best to have things in writing because, again, things might be fine now, but in a year, they may not be. So it's best to have all that in writing. Keep in mind, again, like I said, doesn't matter if it's just your name on the car. If you are the only one who holds the title to that car, if you're the only one who's on the loan for the car, it's marital property. So you need to figure out who's going to keep it, who's going to keep the loan. If you guys need to split things up, again, advice from an attorney can help with that. You can sit down and have that conversation with your spouse. Bank accounts are the same way. Just because your name, let's say you have a big joint account and then two separate, individual accounts, that joint account, those individual accounts, all marital property. So you need to make sure that you put in court documents the last four digits of your bank account and who gets the money in that bank account. If you're going to, split the dollars that are in a joint account, all that needs to be written out. And it's a good thing to have that discussion before you actually go to court and start the filing process. So the third thing that Brooke is going to talk about is something that's very close to my heart because I love helping children And I tend to be that person who will say, hey, suck it up. Your kids are important. So the third thing to talk about is if you have children, you need to talk about what that's going to look like for the kids in a divorce. The court cares only about the best interest of the children. That's the standard that they're looking at. So Brooke's going to go into a little bit more detail about that, but keep in mind, just because she cheated or he cheated doesn't mean that they're a bad parent. The court cares only about the best interest of the children.
Right. So taking that mindset into having a conversation about custody and visitation, which is probably going to be one of the hardest, most sensitive things that you're going to have to discuss with your spouse. One thing you need to consider is what your custody arrangement is going to look like. And there's legal custody and there's physical custody. And legal custody just means that you have decision-making abilities for your children. Typically, that's shared by both parents. And physical custody means the person who actually has them in their physical care. You can do full custody or you can do joint custody. Here in Arkansas, there is a presumption that both parents are equally fit to have custody of their children, and then you have to prove otherwise. But for that to work, both parents really have to get along. So if you're really arguing and fighting here and really wanting that joint custody, it may be difficult to get joint custody because you're showing the court that you really can't even get along on some of these minor things. So like Laura said, it's really important to kind of agree on the things that you can agree on. And maybe there are things that you can't, but the more that you can, the easier it's going to be for you and for your children. So you want to know, you want to discuss what that's going to look like, whether that's a standard agreement that's, mom has the children full time in her custody, dad has them every other weekend, 6 weeks in the summer, whatever works for you. Sometimes people just alternate weeks and they don't do anything different in the summer. So you're going to want to consider things like holidays, what holidays are important to you. And sometimes people don't think about, well, I would like to have my kids on my birthday, or, we want to share their birthdays, or, I want to make sure that I have them on Mother's Day. So little holidays, and especially things that are important for you if you have traditions. If you always have them something at your house on Christmas Eve with your family, then make sure, if you can agree to it, that you do Christmas Eve and they do Christmas Day. So those are types of things that you're going to want to consider. You're also going to want to consider your kids' activities, not just now, but the possibility you can modify later and come back and change. By modify, I mean you can come back and change what your divorce decree looks like. But you want to consider more than just your immediate circumstances. You're going to want to maybe consider the school district schedule that they're going to be in. You're going to want to consider your living situation. The child's age is really important. It's not always great, and judges don't always like for kids to be going back and forth, switching off constantly when they're one. So you're going to want to consider that, and you're going to want to consider the different needs of the child and other commitments you have, like job demands, if it's not practical for you to have the kids at certain times. So if it's not joint, definitely that's what you're going to have to look at. And if it's joint, you need to consider what that actually practically is going to look like, and if it's going to be something that you're able to do. You're going to want to set specific times and days for custody exchanges, and for custody, you're out in visitation, you're going to want to set a location to exchange custody. And also guidelines for communication. What does that look like? Do you guys want to message each other? Do you guys want to do everything on the phone? I'd recommend documenting things in writing. Text message is just fine. So even parenting apps are great, co-parenting apps. So you want to consider that. And you also want to set rules for consistency across both houses. And I realize sometimes that's easier said than done, because if you're divorcing, there may be things co-parenting that are part of the problem. But the more rules that you can set for consistency, the easier it's going to be for your children. And be flexible. So you may say, we have a lot of people that say, well, we want more flexibility with our time and in our decree to be able to do what we want. So we'll just, we'll get along right now, and we'll just agree on something. But you need to put something down on paper in your decree, get it ordered. And if you guys agree to something different, then do it. Nobody's going to be breathing down your neck or monitoring you. You can have some flexibility, but you also want those boundaries, so that way you don't have to fight about it. If conflict does come up, you can always just turn to the decree.
Exactly. And you can see how much we're talking about this. We usually try to keep our Facebook Live informational Tuesdays for Legal Talk Tuesdays to about 10-ish minutes. we're just now halfway done and we're already 15 minutes in. So I'm going to talk about a couple more things related to children, and then we're going to wrap up. But we encourage you to ask questions and reach out to us on our website and through Facebook, because it's not an easy situation to enter into, and you really kind of need to know what your options are. So back to kids. Another thing that's important is child support. So child support is a necessary thing. And we have very specific rules here in Arkansas on child support. You have to think about what is going to be the ongoing payment for the benefit of the child. A lot of people get upset because they think that they're, paying to have their ex-spouse live in a house and that kind of thing. The point of it is that it's helping to feed your children, clothe your children, keep a roof over their heads, make sure the lights are turned on, all that kind of stuff. So it's an ongoing payment for the benefit of the children. How is it calculated? I kind of mentioned the affidavit of financial means earlier. There is a 7-page document that the court uses to figure out what the person who doesn't have primary custody, or it gets a little complicated with joint custody because both people have to fill it out, and you kind of come to whatever this person's obligation, and what's the difference basically between the two. But there's a 7-page document that the court uses, and there are formulas and guidelines on how your take-home pay is calculated. It's not what you take home on your paycheck. It's a different number. And it is also correlates or lines up with a chart. So the chart is a little old. I know that they're talking about trying to redo it at some point, but there's a chart that says, okay, you get paid once a month, twice a month, every other week. Your take-home pay, according to our calculations, is X. You have 2 children, 4 children, 1 child. Here's how much you owe in child support. It's literally that simple. There are deviations that can be allowed, and deviations meaning that the judge can decide that it's better to go up or down from that number, but there has to be a specific reason. So keep that in mind. The Arkansas Child Support Chart, which you can find it at the Department of Finance and Administration. Their website is actually what houses the child support guidelines. I think the Office of Child Support Enforcement website also has them, but it is a very specific thing. It's a very specific number. It's X, then Y. So, and for some people who might be, have higher take-home pay than what the chart says, there's a calculation for that as well. And that's something that you can ask for assistance and from one of us in figuring out what that is. But and some people who might be unemployed right now doesn't mean that you don't have to pay child support. The judge will say that the assumption is that you make at least minimum wage. And so whether or not you're employed, unless you're on disability or something, if you're not employed right now, you still have to pay child support. And the judge will say, we're going to assume that you make minimum wage, and so your number is calculated based on that. So keep that in mind. Another thing with children, medical care. That's a big thing. Who's going to carry the child on their insurance? Is the other spouse going to reimburse that person for half of the insurance premiums through their job? If it's joint custody, it's usually whoever has the best option on their work insurance. But both parties can agree to split things 50-50. A lot of times a judge is going to automatically say that you have to split things 50-50, especially things that are not covered by insurance. So if you have a bill that is over what your insurance would pay, you guys have to, split that 50-50. Extracurricular activities, I know your kid might be too, but it's important to think about that because gymnastics costs money and soccer costs money and all those kinds of things. So you've got to keep that in mind when your kid plays baseball or does some kind of travel dance thing. You've got to keep that in mind as well. And those are things, again, all to consider when you're talking to your spouse, sitting down, trying to figure out what you're going to do with the divorce.
Yep. So those are the three things you're going to want to think about: real property, personal property, and your kids. And you're going to want to have a discussion about those before you even go file for divorce. Thanks for staying with us a little long today. And we will be back here next Tuesday for Legal Talk Tuesday at 11:30. Thanks, guys.